Okay, well, welcome everyone. I wanted to welcome you to this Introduction to QGIS workshop. This is a hybrid presentation, so we have some folks in the room and some online. I'm Janet Reyes, the Geospatial Information Librarian here at UC Riverside Library. And this is a refresh of a workshop I last gave about 2.5 years ago. So it felt like it's time to look at this again because some things have changed over that period of time. But I would say that if you have registered for this workshop and I have your email address, I'll be sending you a copy of the slides. And they have links that you might find helpful. This workshop is also being recorded, and in a week or two, that recording will probably be on the library's YouTube channel. We're going to share links in the chat for you for where you could find that recording when it's ready. We have to do the closed captioning and the editing and things like that. So before we can put it up there. So hopefully between the slides, if you registered, and definitely the recording, if you want to try to follow along later on with some of the things we did today, you'd be able to do that. This workshop's not really designed for in the moment following along, but again, I hope that with those tools available to you later that you would be able to get some practice with what we're going to look at today. I have a helper today. Her name's Aria. She'll just be monitoring the chat for once I'm presenting. It's a little bit hard for me to see what's going on in the chat. So yeah, you'll see her post some announcements and things. And then also she'll be helping me understand if there's a question in the chat going on there. So I'm trying to think if there's any other housekeeping kind of things. Nothing comes to mind right now. So, except to say that at the end, we do have a link for a assessment. And I know we're all a little tired about filling out surveys, but honestly, this will help me understand whether this workshop met your expectations, if there's something else you'd like to see along the lines of geospatial presentations and things. So hopefully, if you have the time, you can just take just a quick minute and give an evaluation at the end. I'd appreciate it that very much. So now I think I'm done with the housekeeping. And let's move on to the UCR land acknowledgement. We'd like to respectfully acknowledge our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseno, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. So here is a slide of what we'll cover today. I'm going to go over some basics about GIS. We're going to look at where QGIS fits among all the other GIS software options that are available to us all. Then we'll get into getting started with QGIS. How do we set it up? How do we get it going? The next set of things that will happen will be a live demo where I'll be showing you how you interact with selecting features, which is a very basic but very powerful feature of a GIS. And then we'll also take a look at how we change the appearance of the map and how we label some of the features in the map. Then we'll come on back to the slides where I'll talk about how to create features, take a quick look at how some of the options for analyzing your data, and then last, plugins, which is a key feature of QGIS that you may not have heard about in other applications like this. So we'll take a quick look at what those are and how they can help you. And then at last, I have a resource slide at the end where more links for you to learn further. Okay, so let's get into GIS fundamentals. So first of all, let's figure out what a GIS is. Many definitions are floating around out there. Here are two that are kind of complementary. They kind of overlap each other, but just different ways of looking at the same thing, right? So on the top, from the Centers for Disease Control, they say a GIS, or Geographic Information System, is a computer-based tool used to store, visualize, analyze, and interpret geographic data. And certainly the CDC gave GIS a big workout during the COVID-19 pandemic when they were tracking the number of cases by area, and then also vaccine distribution and things like that. So they really heavily used GIS during the pandemic. Down at the bottom, we have a quote from a website called GIS Geography, where it says the four main ideas of a geographic information system are to create geographic data, manage it in a database, analyze and find patterns, and then display it on a map. So you can see there's some correlation between what these two entities say when they're defining what a GIS can do. But like the bottom one talks about creating data, which the one on top doesn't, and so forth. And managing, I think, kind of correlates to storing data and things. So anyway, that's the basics of what a GIS is and what it can do. But let's take a look now at the two basic data types that you'll find in a GIS. There are some other ones that are more specialized, but these are the two basic ones. On the left-hand column, we see vector data, and vector data kind of mimics what a hand-drawn map would look like. So if you wanted to identify a very small feature, you would just draw a point on the map. If you have a feature like streams or roads, something linear, you would draw lines. And then the bottom little rectangle there is showing you polygons, which is another way of saying areas or shapes. So we're interested in what's contained within the boundaries of these polygons, right? So vector data is very commonly used. I think almost all GIS users use it at some point or another. But we also want to take a look at raster data, which we're all kind of familiar with our experience with computer screens, and that we know about pixels, and every pixel has a value at a given point in time. So you can use rasters to kind of mimic what we did with the points, lines, and polygons. But really the power of a raster is being able to show values that vary continuously across the surface. So you think of an image and you think of all the different shades from black to white, and then all the different colors and the different shades of those colors. Those are captured pixel by pixel in an image. But also you might have heard of remote sensing. And there are some sensors that can capture things like temperature, ground temperature, or air temperature above the ground, or maybe particulate concentration in the atmosphere and things. So again, it captures those types of readings pixel by pixel, and you can get a very fine-tuned image of or idea of what's going on as you advance across the landscape. So those are your two basic types of spatial data. I want to talk now a little bit more about vector data. Again, I said it's pretty common for people to use this. And what makes a vector file so powerful is, in addition to what you see on the screen, the graphics of the map, sitting behind it is what we call an attribute table. And every feature in a layer on the map has a row in an attribute table that corresponds to that feature. And then every column in that attribute table contains information about that feature. So here we're looking at a screenshot of the data we're going to be using today for the most part, which is from the QGIS website, and it's of Alaska. And I've just chosen a few of the data sets that are available within that sample data set. And so we're looking at airports, and you can see there is on the screen, there's like this one airport. It's represented as a point, and that's highlighted as yellow. And then that corresponding row for it in the attribute table is here highlighted in blue. And we'll talk lots more about attribute tables as we go on, but I just wanted to let you know that this is what makes a GIS powerful, because anything that you can do to manipulate a spreadsheet as far as analysis goes, you can do with an attribute table. So it gives you a lot of power for understanding the features that are on the map, not just relying totally on how it's symbolized or maybe how it's labeled. That you can have lots going on in the background. All right. With that, we'll move on to those GIS software options. And this is my own division in my head of how I look at this landscape of software. It's definitely not official or anything. But I put it into three buckets. And the first bucket is commercial software. Like a company produces this and charges people to use it, right? And the big leader among all the GIS, app types is a commercial GIS called ArcGIS. And that's from a company called Esri, which just happens to have its headquarters about 15 miles away from our UCR campus. They definitely have the biggest market share of anything else out there as far as GIS goes. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have more than 50% of the entire market. I don't know that exactly, but they are awfully big. So that's the one you hear about the most when people talk about GIS, but there are other vendors that provide GIS. Sometimes it's like for a limited functionality you can get for free, but if you want advanced features, you have to pay. And I believe that's the model that Carto uses, the one I have on the screen here. The next category I have is open source, which means it's free. Anybody can download it and use it without having to pay anything. And that's where QGIS fits. This is one of the best known free and open source softwares around there for GIS. It also often comes with GRASS, which we'll talk about in a second. And then there's other products you may have heard of, like Leaflet and Mapbox. Those are also open source. And then my third bucket is just really a mishmash of things that didn't fit into the other two, in my head at least. And I lead off with Google Earth because obviously Google is a company, but they provide Google Earth for free. Anybody can just download it and use it. So there's that. You can use R to do many of the things that a GIS can do, that programming language. And then PostGIS you may hear about, and that's like a relational database kind of thing. And then there's many other variations. But anyway, that's a basic breakdown of the GIS software landscape. So you may be asking yourself now, okay, you said ArcGIS is like the big deal. So should I use QGIS instead of ArcGIS? And as with most things, there are pros and cons, and it just depends on your situation. The benefits of QGIS is that it is free, no obstacles to using it. Another benefit is that it works on multiple operating systems. We'll see that in a second. Whereas ArcGIS is designed for working on Windows, and that's about it. So it gets very clunky if you're trying to use it on a Mac or something like that. So QGIS, you have options as far as what operating system you are using. And QGIS is also produced by a community of developers. It's not a for-profit kind of enterprise. So there's not a profit motive behind anything they do. It's just they're trying to figure out how best to serve our community of users. The drawbacks, well, because it's this volunteer sort of community, you may have some challenges with tech support. There's nobody like who's dedicated to standing by answering questions kind of thing. So you might have to just go out there on the internet and try to find the answer to what you're encountering if it's a problem. Another thing about QGIS, it doesn't have quite as many capabilities as ArcGIS. Now, it does keep up pretty well. There may be a lag in what it can do as far as comparing to ArcGIS, but they do add functionality over time. And those plugins are a big reason why, and we'll talk about that later. And then the third thing, especially in the United States, is that it's just not as well known as ArcGIS. So if you were a student, say, college student going out into the workforce, and you say, I know QGIS, many employers, whether it's a private corporation or a utility company or a government agency, they might just say, well, that's nice, but we use ArcGIS. And I've got 10 applicants here who know how to use ArcGIS. So I would say if you're in college and trying to learn GIS, if you have the opportunity to learn ArcGIS, that might work better for you in terms of employability. Globally, it's a little different. QGIS is much more popular elsewhere in the world, other than the United States. And then also in academia, a lot of folks like to use QGIS rather than ArcGIS. So it's kind of nuanced there as far as what direction to go, but I certainly think it's worth learning at least the basics of QGIS, just to have that as an extra option and it doesn't have the barriers, some of the barriers that ArcGIS does. So here's a quick overview about QGIS. It originated in South Africa, and you'll notice if you read any of the training materials that it's phrased a little bit differently than maybe we would in the United States, and that's the reason why. The first release was in 2009. We're now up to version 3.40.2. And what they do is they also give each version a name that's like the place name, like a city name or something like that. So that's why this one is called Bratislava. And they release new versions pretty frequently. It's really hard to keep up. So I think it's very robust in terms of the number of versions they release in a year. Like I said, it's available for Windows, Mac, Linux, BSD, and also mobile devices, which are their apps for the field, for field work. It's maintained by volunteer developers, like I said. It has a lot of plugins, more than 1,400. Every time I give this workshop, that number just creeps up dramatically. So yeah, we've got lots of extra functionality that we could add to our instance of QGIS if we wanted to. And then I've given the link there to the website. Okay, so that was an overview of what a GIS is and what the GIS software landscape is like, and then what QGIS is itself. Now we're going to get moving on to, okay, I want to explore QGIS. How do I go about that? So when you're ready to download QGIS, I've given the link for where you go to do that, and it's just a web page on the QGIS website. I put an asterisk there after the link because if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you'll see that there's the sample data set that we are going to use today is available to you at the bottom of that page. So very easy, and you could pick it up and do many other things with it, but I've chosen to use it for this workshop. So that's one thing you can do. And even when you go to that download webpage, you have choices. It's not just, there's only one thing I need to do and that's it. You have to think a little bit about what you want to do. So first of all, you have to know which operating system you're using because there's a different installer depending on which operating system. You have to decide whether you want the latest release or the long-term release. Now that one I described on the previous slide, the Bratislava one, that's the latest release. I tend to prefer using the long-term release, which is several versions back. But the thing is, it's pretty stable. Everybody who's ever used it has pretty much found all the bugs that it might have. Whereas the long-term release, the latest release, it's just come out. It may have bugs. And you may be the one that unfortunately finds it and doesn't know what to do about it. So I think most of us who are not developers and such, we're better off using the long-term release. Then I realized as I go through this download page that each of the options like Windows versus Mac versus Linux, there's different sub choices to make. One thing they have on the Windows section is if you want to install what's called OSGeo4W, and that's an installer that may help, especially if you're setting up a shop or a lab and you know you're going to keep using QGIS over and over and over again. It just makes the install process of the new versions a little more streamlined. But certainly, as you're just starting out, it's not something you have to worry about necessarily right off the bat. Okay, I made this slide to show you when you download QGIS from the website, it comes in a folder. And when you open up that folder, this is what you see. And I just wanted to point out that in addition to QGIS, which is, here's the long-term release that I downloaded, 3.34.12, you also get that GRASS GIS that I mentioned earlier. GRASS, it's raster forward, right? It can do vector processing and things like that, but it really, where it shines is working with raster data. And you can see things about terrain and ecosystem modeling, hydrology, image processing. So those are all very raster-based kind of processes, and that's where GRASS has its strength. There's also this, I'm not sure how one pronounces this acronym. It could be SAGA or SAGA. And I had never heard of it before. And honestly, I've never even heard people refer to it. But apparently it has geoscientific analyses capabilities, and that's where its strength lies. So that you also get this, if that would fit your use case better than either GRASS or QGIS. So you really get 3 GIS options with one download. So now we're looking at the basic layout of a QGIS session. It may look a little bit familiar to you if you've ever seen ArcGIS or some of the other GISs out there. Across the top, we have some words that are faded out. It looks like they're faded out, but they're active, and they would be your menu choices. You click on any one of those, and it gives you an array of options below that category. Below the menu, we have toolbars. And these are the ones that come in loaded automatically, but there are extra toolbars that you can search for and add if they would help you in your workflow for whatever you're doing. Over here on the left at the top, we have the browser panel, and the browser panel shows you the file structure that you have on your device that you're using, and it also has additional things that are particular to QGIS. So you can see in this screenshot, I have opened up the folder that has all the Alaska shape files. Each of these shape files correspond to a different layer that will be in our map. And then you can add from your browser panel this data or other data you may have. You can drag it down to the layer list down below, and that's what you're seeing on the map canvas. Any layer that you have here, it can be visible on your map canvas. The locator bar is something that you can use to search the stuff in the GIS itself. So it's not like looking necessarily for a location on the Earth's surface, but it can be used to find, oh, there's a tool that does this, and I can't think of the name of it, but I know it has this word in it or something like that. It can also tell you things like, in the attribute table, the names of the columns that you have in each of the attribute tables, things like that. So it's mainly for locating stuff in the GIS that you would like to just access without having to poke around and see if you can find it. And then finally, at the bottom, we have the status bar. This contains things like the coordinates of the current position of your cursor. It has the scale that you are viewing the map at currently. A couple other things, and over here, this EPSG and a number, I need to talk about that just real quickly because it can trip you up. This is referring to coordinate reference systems, which are related to projections. And I don't know how many of you know about these things, but basically it's all involved with how you translate what's on the curved surface of the Earth onto a two-dimensional flat surface. Mathematically, there's dozens or hundreds of ways to do it. And for the data set you have and your location on the surface of the Earth, there may be different coordinate systems that are most appropriate for you to use. And what you want to make sure that happens, and GIS is really good about doing this automatically for you anyway, but you want to make sure that every layer that you bring in ends up being seen on your map in the same coordinate system, whatever that may be. Because if they're from different coordinate systems, different projections, things that are supposed to be next to each other or overlap may not actually do that because it was a different math to get them there. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but anyway, you just need to be aware that projections and coordinate reference systems are a thing in GIS that you may have to watch out for, especially if you're going to do a lot of precise analytical work or something that you're going to have to publish in an academic journal. You want to make sure you've got those coordinate systems where they should be. Okay, so in that previous slide, you saw we have what looks like data for Alaska, but then you also see this in the background. It looks like Canada, and then Russia and oceans and things. So what you're seeing there is called a base map. And in QGIS, the base map that you get as a default is OpenStreetMap. And the way you add OpenStreetMap is to go up to that browser panel, if you picture that on the upper left, You scroll down toward the bottom of that browser panel and you'll see something that says XYZ tiles. You open that up and OpenStreetMap is what you want. You would just click on that and drag it down into your layer list. And I have to say that, especially like for the data that I'm using for this workshop, it really helps to load your base map in first. Again, with fiddling with those projections and coordinate reference systems, if you do it where you load in the data first and then the base map, my experience was it was just spinning and spinning and spinning, trying to figure out what to do. So much better. It works a lot faster if you load in your base map and then your data. Okay. Yes. We're getting to that next. Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem. No problem. So I also wanted to say that OpenStreetMap is just one of dozens, maybe, or hundreds of base map choices. And if you would like a different type of base map, there are those plugins that will enable you to load in other types of base maps. So the question in the room for those who are online was about how do you add your data? And here we go. So what you would want to do is in your browser panel, you navigate to the folder that contains your data, then open that folder, identify the files that you want, highlight them, and drag them down to your layers list. And again, when I do this, especially for this Alaska data, you get some kind of a message that pops up about how do you want to make these coordinate systems match, basically. And I've never been dissatisfied with what they suggest as the default. This is what QGIS thinks it should be, how we should do this. I've never run afoul of anything there, but so don't be concerned if that's a message that you see. I would just say accept it. And you know, if for some reason it doesn't seem to work, then you have to maybe read up a little bit more on what's going on with the coordinate systems for the data that you have. And of course, in this data set, it's all coming from one source. So they projected all the data into one projection. But if you're pulling from different sources, from different agencies or whatever, you may have that conflict of coordinate systems. So I also wanted to mention is the order of your layers affects what's visible. When you have items, layers in your layers list, it's like you're looking at the side of a stack of pancakes. So whatever's on top is going to cover up everything else down below. If it's like that kind of opaque, dense thing, like the regions of Alaska are, they load in and it's just a solid thing. And because the regions is on top, in this example, I'm not seeing much in the way of airports or lakes or railroads. But when what you can do is just rearrange what's in your layers list so that anything that's big in covering up everything else is right on top of the base map. That allows you to see the other features that it would otherwise be covering up. Also in your layers list, you see that these all have check marks. If I, for some reason, didn't want to see the regions in the moment, I could just toggle that off by unchecking the box, and then the regions would not be something that you see on your map at that time. But you don't have to like delete it entirely from your map or anything like that. Okay, we talked about attribute tables a little bit. I wanted just to mention that when you have your data in the layers list, if you want to see the attribute table, what you do is right-click on the layer in the layer list, and then among the choices that appear when you right-click is Open Attribute Table, and that allows you to see the data. And I wanted to share this again just to show you this. This was from a different workshop. It's from a few years back when I was using the UCR campus map as an example of things. And this is the parking lots. So you can see every parking lot polygon has a row in the table, and then there's different types of information about each of those. But sometimes you don't have to populate that column with information if it just doesn't matter for that particular thing. So you can have, values, numerical values. You can have a text string. You could even have like a URL in there. You can have lots of different things in your attribute table. So it's not just all numbers or all text or anything. It could be a variety of things. But well, suppose you're looking at a map and you don't want to have your attribute table open all the time to understand what you're looking at. The identify tool is very handy because you can click on that and then click on the feature once you have clicked on the identify tool. And what will happen is you get this little pop-up. Again, here we are with UCR information. This was a point layer that shows destinations on campus. And what I clicked on was the Student Recreation Center. So it's giving me all the values in each of the columns in the attribute table for the Student Rec Center. And there you can see that, for instance, there is a URL there for if you wanted to go to the website for the Recreation Center. So yeah, the identify tool can be nice if you just want to take a quick look at the attributes of a particular feature on your map. And before we move on, I just wanted to say saving your work is a good idea. We all know computers can be bulky at times, and it would be a shame if you worked on something for hours and hours and didn't save it and then something happened. So saving the project is a really great idea. I would advocate for every 20 minutes to an hour, maybe, just so you don't have to recreate what you've done and lost. And there is a save button close to the top left side of your QGIS session. In a little bit, we'll also talk about saving edits, which is slightly different. But this will save the overall project, everything that you've done to change the appearance, to do some analysis, whatever it is, you would want to save your project. I speak from experience. Okay, I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and then we're going to get into looking at selecting features. And if anybody has any questions about anything I've said so far, this would be a good time to unmute or ask. Okay.
My data looks different than yours. It's probably because it's in like a different place in my computer. But like it's in like separate files. So I just click on each of these. You can click and drag. Okay.
You have to see the file, I think. Get down below the folder level to the file.
Okay.
So yeah, we had a question in the room about adding data and how to navigate that in the browser panel and getting it down into the layers list. So, selecting features. I make a big deal about this because when you have features selected, it allows you to edit them, which could mean if it's a line or a polygon, you can then go ahead and change its shape. You can change its location, which is like dragging it. Oh, it's not located exactly correctly. I can drag it over here and reposition it. You can also edit the attributes for a feature. And then you can also delete a feature. So if you're kind of nervous, like I am sometimes with new technology, and it's like, I don't want to do anything accidentally and delete some features, you have to realize that you can't just delete any features that have not already consciously been selected. So I hope that puts your mind at ease a little bit as you navigate through a GIS for the first time. And then also by selecting features, this allows you to perform analyses only on those selected features. So on a subset of all the data that you have. And that comes in handy quite a bit. And we're going to look at 3 different ways that you can select features. The first one is using the graphic interface and using a tool to select just by clicking on something or by making a rectangle around features. The second one is selecting by value, which is I want all the features that have this particular value in the attribute table. And then the third one is select by location, and that is I want features that have a particular spatial relationship with another layer in my map. So 3 different ways that you can go about selecting features. And what I'm going to do now is stop the slideshow and cut over to an example of QGIS. Here it is. So first of all, you can see that I have added from the Alaska data set, I have added railroads, regions, airports, and lakes. We're pretty much only going to be working with the airports and regions, but I just wanted to emphasize to you that a layer contains only one type of geometry. So the railroads is in a line layer, and airports are, in this case, in a point layer. Regions and lakes are shapes or polygons. And usually your layers also represent a particular theme. So maybe if you had a transportation layer, you could have railroads and roads represented in that layer. In this case, the way they set up their data, they've just got a layer that's nothing but railroads, right? So that's something to keep in mind. If you remember back to one of my earlier slides, I said if the regions is kind of toward the top of that stack, you're not going to be able to see what's down below it. And sure enough, that's the way it loaded in. So what I'm going to do right now is just drag it down underneath my lakes. And now I'm seeing much more of my airports than I was previously. So let's think about selecting some of the airports. And to select, what we typically need to do is we have to know what layer we want to select from, and we have to highlight that in the layers list before the select tool will work. So I'm coming up here to the select feature by areas tool. And if I draw a rectangle, I've now selected these 3 airports. Notice I did not select the regions down below it because I didn't have that highlighted over here. It's just selecting the features that I have, highlighted in the layers list. And maybe I wanted to, let me add this guy over here. But if I come over here and just do that, it creates a new selection. So I've lost the ones I've already selected. Now, the way to get around that is I am now holding down the Shift key on my laptop, and I'm going to draw a rectangle around these guys again. And now I've retained everything that I have selected, and I'm adding to the selection. Conversely, if I'm like, oh no, you know what, I don't want this guy here, I'm going to hold the Control key down, and I can remove that one from my selection. So Shift and Control give you more control over which features you have identified in this method. I am going to now open the attribute table to show you what this looks like when you have features selected. So I right-clicked on airports. I'm going to open the attribute table. Here it is. And you can see I've got these highlighted in blue correspond to one of the highlighted points on the map. And it kind of is a pain to scroll through and find all of the ones that are highlighted. So what you can do on your attribute table is come down to the bottom left where it says show all features. There's a drop down, and I can say, you know what? I just want to see the selected features. And now I have that. I have only the 4 things that I've selected and nothing else. And of course, you can toggle that back, all kinds of things. So let me go ahead and close this. And then I'm going to come up here to this other tool, which is deselect all features. So that'll just reset me from the beginning. Now I have nothing selected. So that's how the select by area tool works. Now let's go to the next tool, which is select by value, features by value. And if you're familiar with ArcGIS, this is a little different on how this is set up. So I'm in the airports layer, and each of these rows represents the column heading for my attribute table. In this use case, I would like to know which airports are civilian versus military or something else. So I know that information is in the use column. So what I'm going to do is come over here to where it says exclude field. I'm going to use a drop down, and I'm going to change it to contains. And now I'm going to start typing the word civilian. And I get a couple of choices here. So I'm fine with civilian or public. That's what I want to see. And now I can come down here to select features. And I have some of those airports selected now. If I go ahead and open the attribute table, I right click, I come up here to open the attribute table. This one is highlighted, it's civilian public, so is this one, so is this one. We now know the trick. We can go over here, the bottom left, and say, just show me the selected ones. And all the ones that are selected are civilian or public. So that's how you can narrow down, find the features that have a particular value in one of the attributes columns in a hurry. So, there's different ways to do things in a GIS. Sometimes it's redundant. There's multiple ways that you can get to what you want to do. So in this case, instead of going up to the top for that deselect everything, they also have a tool right here in the attribute table that I can do the same thing. So deselect all the things from this layer. So that's what I'm going to do. And now we're back to the beginning again. Okay, so the third way to select things is select by location. And for this demonstration, what I'm going to do is first select a couple of regions over here. So now I've selected those two regions. Now let me go over here and open up this dialog. And this always takes a little bit of thinking. At least I find it to be not super intuitive on my part. But what I want to do is just get a selection of all the airports that are within those two regions that I just picked. So what I'm going to do is select features from, I'm going to change this to airports. And where the features, now there's a lot of words that seem very similar, and I'm not sure about the nuances of what's different between, say, are within and intersect. I could study that, but I haven't. So I'm just going to go with are within, because that's what I'm really interested in right here. So select airports that are within. Now I'm going to leave this as regions because that's what I want. And then there's this box to check. In this case, I have selected a couple of regions. So I'm going to say, I only want the ones that are in the regions that I have selected. I'm going to leave this as creating new selection. But if you do take a peek at the dropdown, there's things like you could remove it from a current selection or add it to a current selection. All kinds of things, options. But for now, we're making a brand new selection of airports. So now I'm just going to come down here at the bottom and click Run. And I'm going to close this. And now you can see that the only airports that are selected are the ones that are within those two regions. So I hope that gives you a feel for the power of selection and what it can do. We're now going to move on to symbology. I'm not liking the fact that the regions are solid brown. I don't really need them to be solid brown. I just want the boundaries maybe, and so I can see through to the base map. And there's a way to fix that, and that's by changing the symbology. So what I'm going to do is come over here to my layers list. I'm going to right click on regions because that's the one I'm interested in. I'm going to pick properties right here at the bottom. I get this whole menu of stuff. The one I want right now is symbology because I want to change the way this thing looks. And this is a little, I think, not super intuitive, but this is the way QGIS has set it up. Again, there's probably a few different ways you can get to the result we want, but I want to show you that right now we've got a single symbol. So that means just every feature in this layer is symbolized the same way. And that's fine with me, but I want to change it to be hollow. So what I can do is come up here where it says simple fill and click on that. And that brings a different set of stuff down here down below. Then if I go here to where it says fill color, instead of that kind of ugly brown, what I'm going to do is click on this. And that's surprising. That's not what I usually see. Well, you know what I can do is just change this opacity to 0.
I clicked on the side button and it gave me a different menu.
Right. Yeah, that's what usually happens. So let's try this. For the stroke color, I'll pick orange. That's the stroke is like the outline. The stroke width, which is the how fat that boundary line is, I'm just going to change it to 0.6. Let's apply that and see if that works. It does. It gets me to the result I'm looking for. I can see it in the background there. So by apply, that just means it's going to make the change, but you can still have the window open in case you decide, you know what, I don't want that after all. But once you're like satisfied with it, you can just click OK, and that's how your symbology is going to be from now on. Finally, I want to label my regions. I want to know the names of them. And again, I can do that not by having to type anything on the map, but what I can do is come on over here to regions, click on properties again. This time, I'm going to click on labels, which is right below symbology. Right now it says no labels, but what I want to do is change that to single labels. And it's pretty smart. GISs are pretty smart. If they see a column that has the word name in it or something similar, they're like, that's probably the one they want to use for labeling their features. And in this case, they were correct. Name _2 is what I want. That's where the names are. I'm going to leave the font as Arial. I'm going to change to bold. The size, I think I'll make that a 12 rather than a 10. And I'll leave everything else the same, and I'll apply. And you can see now we have labels. I'll just go ahead and close this out. And there's all kinds of settings you can have. You can see as I zoom in, the labels kind of, center themselves in the polygon differently from when you're zoomed out. But there's settings that you can fiddle with for that. So with that, I'm going to cut back over to the slides and we can wrap up. Or get closer to wrapping up anyway. Let's go. So I'm skipping over all the slides that show you what I just went through, including what I was expecting to see when I changed the symbology. That's the very first time I've ever seen that other field come up. Very, very strange. But let's go talk about creating features, analysis options, and plugins. So my experience here at the university is that there aren't too many people who are interested in creating data, drawing points, lines, and polygons. But if you are, I just wanted to run through real quick how you would go about doing that. You're not finding data that's out there already. You are creating it for yourself. So again, a couple different ways you can do this. If you find the new shapefile layer tool among the toolbars, that's one way to do it. Or on the menu, if you choose layer and then create layer and then new shapefile layer, you get to the same interface. And you just need to, what you need to do is create the structure for the file that you're going to make before you actually make it. So you can't just go and start scribbling on the map and drawing points and things. It has to know what's the structure of this file going to be like. So you give it a name. You choose whether it's going to be a point, line, or polygon. Here's something about the projection. If you have feelings about that it needs to change, this is where you would do that. And then after that, what you're going to do is assign names to each of the columns of your future attribute table. You're going to say what kind of data is going to be in that column. So if it's a column that's just going to be all numbers that you need to calculate with, you set it up that way. If it's better as a text field, set it up that way, so forth and so on. How many characters you're going to allow. And then as you go through this, you can keep adding columns and it'll appear here in this table down below. Once you've finished all that and your new layer appears in your layers list, there's a tool up at the top that looks like a pencil, and that's the toggle editing tool. And then that allows you to start adding. Now, if you set it up to be a point layer, you're going to see this tool that for adding points. If you set it up to be lines, you're going to see that tool. Polygons, you're going to see that tool. And then you click on that, and then you start drawing with your cursor, clicking. Each time you click, especially for a line or a polygon boundary, you create what's called a vertex, and that allows the line to depart from being a straight line, right? This is where it can curve. So very similar to creating points, but when you're creating a linear feature that has changes in direction, it's called creating a vertex. When you create the very last vertex, you right-click on it. That finishes off the feature, and then you get a window that appears, and then you can populate the attributes for the feature that you just created. So that's, in other words, adding the information that's going to be in that row in the attribute table. And again, after you've done some editing for a while, it's a great idea to save your layer edits so that you don't lose them. And there's a slightly different button, as you see, from the saving the project button icon, but this one has a little pencil in front of it, so that's where you save your layer edits. And usually if you try to close out of a session and you haven't saved your layer edits, you'll get a little warning, window that says, do you want to save your edits first before you close out? So yeah, it tries to remind you to do that. So analysis, of course, this is a big topic for so many people. Everybody has different use cases. It's hard to get into it in an introductory session, but I wanted to say that you can go to the menu and look at the processing menu choice and then toolbox underneath that, and it will show you all the different categories of tools that are available to you. Like here, I've opened up all the tools that are under vector analysis. You can see the kinds of things that a GIS can do. But if that approach doesn't work for you as far as finding what you need to do, there's also a vector or raster in the menu, and you can click on those and see what drops down are tools and other things that are related to that format. So that might be a more streamlined way to find out what analysis options are available to you. Also, if you go to view on the menu, one of the options that you see there when you click it is toolbars, and that's where you can add maybe more toolbars that you don't have that come up for everybody, but may be helpful for your workflow. So that's where you can see the choices there. And lastly, the plugins that I've been mentioning throughout the workshop. So 1,400 of them. QGIS comes installed with several, but there's lots and lots more. Some of them are pretty specialized. I have to say, this is, of course, the top of the alphabet, and we have things like attributes of Irish and British plants, Austria weather, or Austrian elevation. So not everybody needs that, right? So this is what makes QGIS kind of lightweight, is it doesn't have a lot of functionality loaded in that may be very specialized. It may bog it down because it's just in there, but you can add it if you need it with a plugin. And these are all created by, again, volunteer developers. What I did was highlight Attribute Painter here. When you do click on one of the choices for a plugin, it gives you a description of what this thing does. And if it sounds like it would be useful for you, you can also see that you can see what other people have given it as a rating and how many downloads it has. So of course, a high number of downloads suggests that it's a pretty good tool that lots of people have found useful. And then you would just go ahead and install it. And of course, up here you can search. You couldn't know all of these by name. So you can search by basically what kind of thing you're looking for and then see the results that come up. Resources. Well, the website is really good, and there is a training manual, a user guide, other kind of things from the QGIS organization. Of course, YouTube also has many videos that you might find useful, including a video of a workshop I gave a few years ago, which is kind of the next step up from this introductory one. A few of the kind of common things that people would do with vector data. So if you're ready for that next step, and you might want to take a look at that video and see if it would help you. But of course, there's tons of other information out there. If you're looking for answers to a specific question, I think what's most common for people who use QGIS is to go to GIS Stack Exchange, and you would just type QGIS and then the thing that you're encountering in the search box and see if other people have asked the question, and then you could pose your own question if it's not coming up for you there. Okay, well, that concludes the workshop with 4 minutes to spare. I hope this has been somewhat helpful for you. Remember that the library offers workshops on other topics, not just geospatial ones. We've got some coming up that might help you with citation management, some maker types of workshops, other things going on. So just keep us in mind if you need to learn a new skill or advance your current skills. We've got you covered there. Again, appreciate it if you would take a couple minutes, not too long, just to fill out that evaluation. And I thank you for your time, and I can stop talking and just see if there's any questions or comments.